Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video and myself, Jonathan MS Pitts. Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 19th of July 2024. This is going to be quite a quick video, not too much to report on the military aid and assistance front. I'm just going to go back to something I would like to have included, but it's only just come out now in my previous video, and that's with regard to strikes on Odessa yesterday, or indeed attempted strikes on Odessa. So yesterday there was an Iskander-M ballistic missile that attacked Odessa region. It was intercepted and destroyed, according to head of Southern Defense Force press office, Dmytro Platenchuk. Several prior missiles had targeted Ukraine's port infrastructure. Platenchuk called it a landmark event. I'm reading between the lines here, and this is, I guess, relevant to the military aid video in and of itself, because I think this suggests that there's now some anti-ballistic missile capability around Odessa. So whether one of those new Patriot missile systems has arrived in Ukraine and has found its way, well, we're under the impression that at least one of them was in Ukraine already some time back. So this could well be that Patriot system that is capable, maybe a PAC-3 Patriot system capable of taking out ballistic missiles in position near Odessa. We thought that maybe there was one near Odessa previously, but maybe not. I guess you could move things in place and then move them out of place, not only for security reasons. You want to keep them moving around particularly if they're the German variety that are loaded on the back of trucks. If they're not, then it's slightly more difficult to up sticks and move these Patriot batteries. But it might be that they put one in Odessa because Odessa was getting hammered. The port infrastructure is getting taken out, so put one there and maybe took it up to Kharkiv because Kharkiv was getting whatever. So there might have been one in Odessa previously, but I think this is suggesting that they now have an improved capability of air defense around Odessa. So good news for the Ukrainians in that respect. Okay, now let's go to where we were going to start. So Zelensky's in the UK at the moment. Let Ukraine use Western weapons freely to push Russia towards peace, he says. This is, I presume, in Ukrainian. He urges neutralizing Russian military airfields, highlighting Ukraine's constrained defense due to rules on Western arms use. Meanwhile, Russian missile strikes continue. He is at Blenheim Palace talking to European leaders. Yeah, no, it's. I will read out because he is speaking English, but it is overdubbed by a Ukrainian. The fewer restrictions Ukraine faces on using effective weapons, he says, the more Russia will desire peace. Russian aircraft taking off from their airfields are bombing our children and citizens. This action sorry, I messed up there. This action would not only eliminate specific targets, he says, but also significantly diminish Russia's capacity to sustain the war. So much is riding on a change in restrictions to Ukraine. I mean, it is infuriating that people like Scholz has come out yesterday and said this, but possibly with reference to the US restrictions. It could be that the US are the nation that's driving responses like Scholz and Starmer's, or the British MOD's change of tune. So Starmer came out and said, yeah, you can use Storm Shadows as you see fit, and then the British MOD came out the next day and said, actually, no, they can't. And my theory is that that's driven by the Americans, and that seems to be what Scholz insinuated. Well, I don't get it. Like, these airfields are just ripe for the picking. Just such essentially easy targets. You know where they are. You know how you need to hit them. Certainly the ones within ATACM's 300-kilometer range. There are a few airfields there that just obvious targets, but they don't want Western NATO weapons to be seen to be striking deep into Russian airspace to take out huge numbers of Russian airplanes, because that would be seen as escalatory. And I understand that. Like, I understand the explanation. I mean, I can see the worry. But just, have we not learned that every red line that Russia's previously put in place has been ineffective, impotent. And so, yeah, I think that the US and NATO should take that risk. I think Russia need to be beaten rather than to have this grinding war that goes on and on that certainly doesn't benefit Ukraine. And Zelensky also says it's been 18 months and F-16s have not yet arrived. So there are claims and renewed claims that they should be there by the end of July. No, the end of summer, isn't it? So they've got like 6 weeks before they're due to arrive. There's some rumours that some of them are operational from Romania. I've not heard anything about that since, but it's been 18 months and the planes have not reached us. Zelensky said in an interview with the BBC. Quite a lot from that BBC interview. We'll pop into that in the Geopolitics video. But on the other hand, Ukraine now has an excellent strategy for waging war, says the Commander-in-Chief of NATO Joint Forces in Europe, Kavoli. He obviously is quite upbeat about Ukraine's strategy. I think they've had to change their strategy, obviously, throughout the war, as you do, reacting to different scenarios. It's going to be depending a lot on the kit they get and the boots on the ground that they have and how well trained they are. I think they are going to have an active defence for 6 months and think about doing things next year. However, it is interesting that Zelensky has said in that BBC interview that I've just referenced that we don't have to take all our territory back by force. So there is this ideal, maybe it's an acceptance, it's a concession that they aren't going to militarily take their territory back to 1991 borders. Now, I think most people have come to accept that now, but it's interesting that he has said that kind of explicitly. But the idea is that you put Russia in such a position that they have to give that territory back. That's, I think, the best case scenario for the Ukrainians. Whether you think that's likely to happen is another thing. Now, we heard about the Japanese $3.3 billion that was going to be loaned to, just trying to work out exactly how it was going to get to Ukraine and where it's come from. Japan will transfer $3.3 billion to Ukraine from revenues from frozen assets of the Russian Federation, says Jürgen Naudit. This is interesting because we were in the understanding that most of the frozen Russian assets were in Europe, 300 and whatever billion it was. There was some in the US, but actually not that much in the US. The other place was Japan. So Japan has a fair bit of frozen Russian assets, but I didn't believe nearly as much, not nearly as much as in the EU, but the EU were going to give $3 billion or there or thereabouts, bit more to Ukraine per year. And yet Japan's come out with 3.3 billion to Ukraine from their frozen assets. So yeah, there's something funky going on here that I'd need to understand better. According to Kyoto, Japan is in a hurry to complete the development of the aid delivery system by the end of the year. I wonder why that is. The USA and the EU. So I wonder if that's linked to the US elections. The USA and the EU, which play a leading role in the use of Russia's frozen assets, will each contribute $20 billion out of $50 billion. The remaining $10 billion will be shared between Japan, Great Britain and Canada. Interesting. The G7 countries have decided that aid to Ukraine, which is suffering from Russian aggression, will be provided in the form of a loan, and investment income from frozen Russian assets will be used to repay the loan. So yeah, that's one way of doing it. So you loan Ukraine the money from your own coffers, I guess, and you get preferential loan state interest rates because of, I presume, how reliable you are as a country, and then you're paying yourself back monthly, not from Ukraine, but from frozen Russian assets. Sounds pretty reasonable to me. France is preparing, I've talked about this aid package, but it's just interesting tying it all together. So they're preparing their new aid package for Ukraine. According to French MOD, the package will include 128 VAB armoured personnel carriers, 18 Caesar self-propelled howitzers, 24 light tanks, the AMX-10RC, and most probably anti-tank missiles and trucks and radars. At the end of 2024, 2,100 Ukrainian soldiers are expected to train at French military camps for 2 months. The detachment, equivalent to a French army brigade, will receive combat training at the same centres that annually prepare French soldiers for external operations. Part of the training will be decentralised for tank training. I believe that basically they're making, like, if you like, a French mechanised unit here. So they're just going to be giving them all this French equipment. That's how I understand it. And it'd be like a Ukrainian trained, French trained and French provisioned unit. Good stuff. Quote, we have more than 165 developments of various types and are tested and used on the battlefield. In terms of the number of drones, we are clearly not losing, and perhaps we will win, says Commander of the Drone Forces, Sukarevsky. Okay, so there are two things here, which is one, the number of variants of drones. So they say 165 different drones. I guess that means maritime, so USVs, unmanned surface drones, UAVs, unmanned aerial drones, and UGVs, unmanned vehicles. Anyway, all three types of drones, and that would equate to 165 types of drone. And I guess what they're saying here is that's more than the Russians have, but also in total number of drones, full stop. Now, I think there's a bit of underselling it here. My guess is that they're probably outnumbering the Russians quite considerably here. And that's really good news, and they need to continue to do that hugely. Now, German aid to Ukraine talks about some video footage on TikTok of the Susanna, one of the rarer Susanna 2 self-propelled howitzers in Ukrainian service. At the beginning of October 2022, Germany, along with Denmark and Norway, financed the production and delivery of 16 Susanna 2 self-propelled howitzers to Ukraine for a total of 92 million euros. As of today, only 2 of them have been delivered, with the manufacturer either facing major production issues or the Slovakian government blocking the production and delivery to Ukraine. Strokey beard. Ukraine already had 8 prior to the German, Danish, Norwegian contract in service. So bringing the total number to 10 howitzers supplied to Ukraine, and according to Oryx, 2 of them are being confirmed as destroyed. So possibly 8 still in service, but a number due to reach there, and they haven't reached there. So what is holding back those Susanna, very capable drones? And unfortunately, it could be that it is a result of the Slovakian government, and that would be, thank you very much, Ivan, and that will be a real shame if that's the case, because it's politicization of this war unnecessarily so. Now, the German, who is he talking about here, GIZ company, has donated robotic equipment for extinguishing fires, moving cars or other items, to off-road buses, trailers, women's clothing for emergency rescue operations, and backpacks for firefighters. This is really good, and that's going to the emergency services in Ukraine. The handover, which was made public today, took place via the Strengthening State and Municipal Emergency Services in Ukraine program, which gets financed by the German government. Again, Germany just doing all sorts of awesome stuff, and thank you for German aid to Ukraine for showing this as well, because it's not just about military equipment, but it's about enabling Ukraine to keep functioning as a state. And then final thing I'm going to talk about here is the Lithuanian Seimas. So the parliament in Lithuania has decided to withdraw from the Convention on Cluster Munitions. Agriculture Minister said that his country was, quote, more naive than Russia's other neighbours who did not sign the convention. So this is, I guess, the idea, and we've had these conversations when we were talking about the cluster munitions coming from the US, that although more than half, the majority of countries in the world have signed up to the convention, the most populated nations on Earth have actually not. And it's something like 8 out of the 10 most populous nations on Earth have not signed up to the convention, because actually the cluster munitions are incredibly useful in war. and they've been striving to just improve them so there aren't so many dud sub-munitions in the... I made a mistake the other week because I had a brain fart, but basically I said that the dud rate referred to the shells. Of course, they referred to the sub-munitions. So out of, say, 100 sub-munitions, if you have a 2% dud rate, means 2 out of those 100 would not explode, and then they get left in a field, and then a small child can, you know, walk over them and blow up, and that's the terror of war. But you can say that about shells in general, and landmines, and you know, all elements of war are horrible and dangerous. And I think you've just got to, from Ukraine's point of view, I think you just got to use the best weapons to do the job most effectively. For it's a problem though, because then you can start making an argument for things like using wide-scale chemical warfare and all sorts. So it's the problem with war is when you try to moralize and legally delineate elements of war, it's such a problematic project, because essentially war is the murder of other human beings, done by kind of usually a state on another state, right? And trying to say you can do this but you can't do that is quite difficult. It is somewhat arbitrary. But on the other hand, you know, there are certain things that intuitively people go, yeah, no, I'm okay with that. Like, I don't like it, but I can accept that more than I can accept that. So, you know, nuclear weapons and chemical weapons. But actually, you know, when you look at a whole spectrum of weaponry, what you're doing, this is called the Socrates paradox in really anytime you have a continuum and try to delineate on a continuum, you suffer from the Socrates paradox issue, which is if you keep taking a grain of sand off a sand dune, when does it become not a sand dune? And of course there is no exact point, there's no objective point. It's kind of a fuzzy, like at some point you get to there being, you know, well, that's still a sand dune, that's still a sand dune, that's still a sand dune, and eventually you get to like 0 grains of sand. That's a paradox. And it's like, well, I haven't said that's not a sand dune yet, because there's no one point. It's not like 1,364 grains of sand make a sand dune. And so trying to delineate on a continuum is objectively impossible. It becomes subjective and somewhat fuzzy. So when you're saying like what's an acceptable weapon of death and what's an unacceptable weapon of death, you will get disagreement. There is no objective truth yet there, and you could argue that even trying to delineate at all is problematic. Either you have murder or you don't have murder. So I'm not trying to justify terrible weapons. I'm as much justifying no weapons as terrible weapons. I'm mainly saying there is no objective truth to a demarcation of terribleness, right? And it is just a gradation of horrors that at some point we kind of go, yeah, okay, now I guess that's a sand dune now-ish, sort of. Somewhere around this area that became a sand dune. Somewhere around this area, those weapons became too horrible for me to entertain as being used. And cluster munitions operate in that kind of grey area where you've got people going, no, that's freaking terrible, because not necessarily because of what they do to those people, but it's afterwards when, you know, civilians come and walk on those fields, landmines, submunitions from cluster munitions. So the answer to that is, okay, yeah, we do understand that. So we have to work super freaking hard after the war is over to make sure that doesn't happen. And that's where you start getting help from all of these entities with regard to I know that's not necessarily demining equipment, but when you have demining equipment being given, and you have charities like the Halo Trust and others working super hard already while the war is still going on to clear up the fields, that's the important and lengthy work. But I think it is, you have to make some calculation, and for me it is better that Ukraine uses cluster munitions on the battlefront and suffers some consequences on the back end, but tries really hard to mitigate those consequences and informs their population continuously for decades to come that if you're going to live around here, there will be very much the threat of landmines and submunitions in and around everywhere here. So, you know, just be warned, and we're going to do everything we can as a government with our international partners to clear this area up. But I think that's a better way to go. It's not obviously not optimal, because war is not optimal. So you have to do war, and you're going to want to use the most effective weapons to do war, but there will be some ramifications to using those weapons. Anyway, I hope that explains it a little bit. This is going to be a short video. Now I've banged on about stuff like that. So anyway, thanks for listening. Please like, subscribe and share. Take care. I'll speak to you soon. It helps if I don't just close the program down that I'm trying to stop. Stop video. Now.